Come on and cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river over you.
Hello everybody and welcome to this emission of Saturday 17th of January 2026. I hope you are all doing very well. How was last night, Friday night? I hope that was entertaining at least. Safe above all. Okay, today we have an article from Tori Says, Chaos Coordinator in X. That is a very spectacular piece I didn't read. I'm reading it with you today at the same time. I need to read. So let's read together. This is the article. Her name was Ingga, Venezuela, and the war you were never shown. This is the handle, I don't exist, Tori. Fantastic author, podcaster, researcher, educator, etc. Let's start. Chaos is not the breakdown of the system. Chaos is the system operating as designed. What you're watching across governments, economies, wars, elections, and institutions is not failure, incompetence, or decay. It is coordination masquerading as disorder. At this scale, chaos, or chaos, does not emerge spontaneously. It is engineered, rooted, financed, narrated, and maintained. Once you learn to read its patterns instead of its headlines, the illusion collapses and a single truth becomes unavoidable. None of this is accidental. Performative chaos. I watched these patterns long enough to know it isn't theory, it's method. My handle on X is Chaos Coordinator, and I wear it deliberately. I don't pretend chaos isn't happening. I map it, track it, and connect its pattern. I pride myself of coordinating chaos in the only way that matters, by observing how it is manufactured, rooted, financed, justified, and repeated across borders. Oh, I forgot to present the music of today. Today's music is by... where is it? Cooking Soul. Yeah, I know, it's a very strange name. Very similar to this, the Abramovich project. I don't remember the name, but it's very similar. Cooking Soul, here. Check it out, the cover. Oh, it's behind the article, I'm sorry. Maybe later. Oh no, I got it. What I did? Sorry, here we go. Cooking Soul. I cannot see the name of the album. Sorry. Let's continue. Where was I? Across borders. That is precisely why I'm qualified to speak about the global disorder we're living through. Because once you follow the money, the narratives, and the timing, it becomes impossible to believe any of this is accidental. Yeah, that makes sense. Chaos at this scale requires planning, alignment, and maintenance. Sorry. And I've spent enough time watching the machinery turn to know the difference between failure and design. So, let's talk about chaos. We begin domestically. Let's take a look at US tax dollars vanishing into programs no voter remembers approving, fraudulent structures that repurpose and launder funds from taxpayers, funding structures no one can trace, and outcomes no one can audit. Look at the governments collapsing without tanks in the streets, leaders replaced without ballots changing. Revolutions branded as movements, and wars that never quite end, only pause long enough to be renamed peace. Look at the treaties that change nothing. Sanctions that hurt civilians instead of regimes, and aid that somehow returns richer to those who never need it. No one of this is random, none of it is incompetence. It all points back to one thing: Ingga. What is that? She is everywhere and nowhere. Let's wait the music. She never signs her name, never takes the podium, never runs for office. She doesn't overthrow governments. She reorganizes them. She doesn't start wars. She manages instability. She reorganizes them. She doesn't start wars. She manages instability. She doesn't steal money. She allocates resources. When tax dollars disappear, she smiles and calls it complexity. When sovereignty erodes, she shrugs and calls it cooperation. When nothing improves and no one is accountable, she reminds you that the system is just too big to understand. Ingga thrives on deniability. She operates best when everyone agrees something is wrong but can't quite agree on who did it. She disperses responsibility so finely that outrage has nowhere to land. Every disaster has a committee. Every decision has a process. Every process has a justification, and every justification points somewhere else. She loves optics, elections that change faces but not outcomes. Peace deals that make headlines while pipelines, debts, and dependencies remain untouched. Wars framed as humanitarian necessity, restriction framed as generosity, and influence framed as partnership. She ensures there is always motion, summits, conferences, agreements, so no one notices the direction never changes. Ingga doesn't rule by force. She rules by exhaustion, by paperwork, by endless intermediaries, by convincing nations that choose this path themselves. By convincing nations they choose this path themselves. By making citizens feel vaguely uneasy but powerless. Sensing manipulation without being able to name the manipulator. She is patient. She doesn't need you to believe in her. She only needs you to keep arguing with your neighbor while she rearranges the board. This is why the chaos feels synchronized. Why crisis stack instead of resolve? Why accountability dissolve the moment you reach for it? Because the problem isn't left versus right, war versus peace, or spending versus saving. The problem is that Ingga has learned how to govern without ever appearing to govern at all. Who or what is Ingga? I refer to Ingga as her for the same reason sailors name ships, nations speak of the motherland, and storms are given human names. Not because the object itself has gender, but because doing so acknowledges agency, continuity, and intent. Giving Ingga a feminine form allows the human mind to grasp and to sense what abstractions usually conceal. This system moves, adapts, nurtures dependence, punishes disobedience, and survives its creators. Ships are called she because they carry lives. Wow! Cross borders, enable conquest or trade, and outlive the hands that build them. Ingga functions the same way. She carries policy, narratives, capital, and control across governments and generations, indifferent to who is steering at any given moment. By personifying her, we can finally stop treating the chaos as weather and start examining the vessel that keeps delivering it. Because until you understand the architecture that moves beneath the surface, you will keep mistaking impact for accident instead of design. You will keep mistaking impact for accident instead of design. Once you understand why Ingga is treated like a vessel rather than a villain, it becomes easier to explain what she actually is without naming her outright as an institution that can be pointed to, sued, or voted out. Integrated networked governance architecture isn't a building, a charter, or a treaty. It's the way power learned to survive democracy by moving sideways instead of down. When authority could no longer rely on kings, coups, or overt occupation, it learned to embed itself across systems that appear unrelated but act in concert. I've watched this pattern long enough to know it isn't theory, it's method. There's a method for this chaos. The first clean historical example is the post-World War II reconstruction of Europe. Publicly, the Marshall Plan is remembered as generosity. America is rebuilding a shattered continent. In practice, It was an early masterclass in networked governance. Aid money flowed. Yes, but it flowed. Flowed conditionally through financial institutions, industrial coordination boards, trade agreements, currency stabilization mechanisms, and media narratives that framed compliance as recovery and resistance as regression. Governments remained nominally sovereign. Elections still happened. Flags still flew. But the economic, industrial, and monetary choices available to those governments were quietly constrained upstream. Bretton Woods institutions didn't rule Europe, they structured Europe. No single actor appeared in charge, yet outcomes aligned with remarkable consistency. That wasn't coincidence. Coinciding. That was architecture. The second example is the late Cold War and immediate post-Cold War NGO explosion, particularly in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet sphere. Power didn't arrive in tanks this time, it arrived as civil society. Foundations, democracy promotion organizations, development banks, media training programs, academic exchanges, election monitoring groups, and independent policy advisors flooded in simultaneously, each one taking along looked benign. Each one taking along looked benign, often even admirable, but together they formed a lattice that reshaped political incentives, economic policy, and information environments before voters ever entered a polling booth. Governments that aligned were rewarded with access, capital, legitimacy, and favorable coverage. Those that didn't found themselves isolated, sanctioned, or destabilized. Wow, what's so hard that word? Often by internal movements that appear organic but were externally scaffolded. Again, no single hand on the wheel, just a ship that always seemed to turn the same way. This is where experience matters. A junior analyst sees fragmentation and assumes disorder. A seasoned PSYOPs director recognizes synchronization when financial pressure, regulatory standards, technological dependence, narrative framing, and diplomatic signaling all converge on the same outcome without a formal order being issued. You're not looking at chaos, you're looking at governance that has learned how to disappear. This is why Ingga is so difficult to confront. She doesn't need to be obeyed. She only needs systems to depend on one another. And this is why Ingga is the root of the problem we're facing now. Because when governance becomes architectural rather than political, accountability stops at the surface. Leaders rotate. Parties argue, wars start and stop, money moves, headlines change, but the underlying networks remain intact, patiently steering outcomes while insisting no one is actually in charge. No thrones needed. What these examples make clear is that power no longer needs a throne to rule from. Once you see that outcomes are being produced without orders, without declarations, and without visible authority, the only remaining question is how coordination replaces command. That question is the hinge point. Because this is where the illusion of governance finally breaks down and the mechanics underneath become visible. At its core, what we are witnessing is a shift away from vertical authority toward horizontal coordination. Traditional governance depended on a clean chain of command. Voters selected representatives, representatives pass laws, laws are enforced. That model still exists on paper, but it no longer produces outcomes. Decisions are now shaped far upstream, across multiple interconnected nodes, long before anything reaches a legislature, a ballot, or a public debate. By the time citizens are allowed to participate, the range of possible outcomes has already been narrowed. What looks like choice is often just selection among pre-aligned options, and even those options are really not available. What a mess! This is where integration matters. Domains that once acted independently, political authority, financial leverage, technological control, regulatory enforcement, and narrative shaping are now fused. A decision made in one domain propagates automatically through the others. A financial standard quietly becomes a regulatory requirement. That requirement dictates technological compliance. That compliance is framed by the media and academic consensus as inevitable, neutral, or best practice. At no point does a government need to formally mandate the outcome. The system does it for them, while maintaining the appearances. While maintaining the appearance of decentralization and non-governmental action. And this only works because the architecture is networked. Power is distributed across nodes rather than concentrated in a single visible center. International institutions, private foundations, multinational corporations, standards bodies, intelligence partnerships, academic consortia, and civil society organizations all act as a partial authorities. None of them appears sovereign on its own. Collectively, however, they exert sovereign-level control. Responsibility diffuses across the network. Accountability evaporates. When harm occurs, no single actor can be cleanly blamed because no single actor ever appears fully in charge. Kind of like Antifa. It's naming an Ingga, but using a name that is wrong. It should be called Ingga. This is the point where the discussion can no longer stay historical, because the architectures described above was built for human coordination, but is now being optimized for machine coordination as AI systems are layered into policy modeling, risk assessment, compliance enforcement, financial routing, narrative moderation, and administrative decision-making. The ability to revert to human-centered governance collapses. Once decisions are justified by models no one fully understands, trained on systems no one voted for, and enforced across networks no one controls, exclusion is no longer a political choice, it becomes a technical impossibility. History will record that the greatest act of domination was not force, but design. Systems so efficient they replaced consent. So distributed they escaped blame. So distributed they escaped blame. And so advanced their creators mistook obedience for order. Ingga and Venezuela. This is where the architectures become irreversible, and where the CCP understood the end game earlier than most. And it's also where recent US actions begin to look unintelligible to the public unless you understand the battlefield has shifted. Venezuela is a useful entry point, not because it is unique, but because it is visible. What looks to many like crude intervention, hypocrisy, or resource obsession is better understood as a late-stage attempt to interrupt an already embedded governance architecture. One that was quietly being wired into data systems, financial rails, identification mechanism, energy management, and AI-assisted state control, aligned outside the Western sphere. The outrage comes from a category error. People are still interpreting state behavior through a 20th century lens, while the conflict itself is being fought inside a 21st century system they cannot see. And now, you, the reader, can see why Ingga had to be personified in this report before being revealed. Not because it is alive, but because it behaves as something that acts. I'm waiting for the music. Ingga is not a woman, not an entity, not an institution, it is a method, a system, and increasingly a prison. One that operates not through force but through cognition. It constrains what nations believe is possible and what populations believe is reasonable. When these architectures become weaponized, when AI governance, infrastructures dependency, and narrative control converge, interventions no longer look like defense, and resistance no longer looks legitimate. This is why the public response is outrage rather than understanding. They are reacting to visible moves without seeing the invisible board. Once that prison is automated, escape doesn't require revolution, it requires something far more difficult: reclaiming the ability to think outside an architecture designed to think for you. China did not export tanks or ideology first, it exported infrastructure. Data centers, smart city platforms, surveillance systems, payment rails, cloud service, telecom backbones, logistics software, and AI-enabled governance tools were offered as modernization packages, cheap, fast, turnkey, and framed as neutral technology. Developing nations didn't experience this as conquest. Developing nations didn't experience this as conquest. They experienced it as relief. Efficiency replaced dysfunction. Automation replaced corruption. Stability replaced chaos. On the surface, it looked like progress. But governance infrastructure is never neutral. Once a nation builds its administrative nervous systems on foreign designed architectures, sovereignty becomes conditional. AI-driven governance systems don't just collect data, they define decision space. They determine how populations are identified, how risk is calculated, how compliance is enforced, how dissent is flagged, how resources are allocated, and how legitimacy is measured. When those systems are trained on models aligned with CCP doctrine or dependent on Chinese hardware, updates, maintenance, and cloud access, the state no longer governs itself. It administers parameters set elsewhere. This is why extraction becomes nearly impossible once adoption is completed. You can change leaders, you can rewrite constitutions, but you cannot easily remove an AI governance layer without collapsing basic state functions. Tax collections, border control, public safety, welfare distribution, transportation, energy management, and communications all become intertwined with the system. Removing it doesn't restore sovereignty, it produces paralysis, and Beijing understands this. Dependency doesn't require loyalty, it only requires reliance. What makes this strategy devastatingly effective is that it fits perfectly inside integrated network governance architecture. No invasion, no annexation, no overt coercion, just alignment. Chinese firms partner with local governments. Loans are issued through development banks. Standards are harmonized. Training programs educate local officials. Media narrative emphasize modernization and non-interference. By the time concerns surface about data ownership, policy autonomy, or external influence, the question is no longer, should we stop? But how do we function if we do? Lost track of the album. And this is the critical point. AI governance does not merely assist the state, it replaces judgment. Once embedded, it becomes the invisible arbiter of policy, enforcing rules faster than humans can question them, and at a scale humans cannot oversee. When that system is externally aligned, sovereignty isn't stolen, it is rerouted. Decisions still happen locally, but outcomes converge elsewhere. This is why nations that have adopted CCP-style AI governance infrastructure will eventually realize they've handed over more than data or efficiency. They've handed over optionality. The ability to choose a different path disappears when every alternative requires dismantling the machinery that keeps the country running. At that point, governance no longer belongs to the people, the parliament, or even the state. It belongs to the architecture. And architecture's one part in concrete and code does not vote itself out. This is what happened in Venezuela, not a clumsy throwback to Cold War interference, not a resource grab explained by oil alone, and not a failure of diplomacy, but a collision between architectures operating centuries apart in how they understand power. Through a 20th century lens, the actions of these administrations look incoherent, aggressive, even immoral. Through the lens of INGA, they are preemptive, structural, and defensive. You don't negotiate with a system that replaces sovereignty itself. You interrupt it. You interrupt it before it finishes installing. Yeah, this is the hard truth most people are not prepared to face. Sovereignty in the digital era is not protected by borders, flags, or elections. It is protected by who controls the infrastructure that thinks for the state. Once a single governance architecture spans the world, once data, finance, compliance, identity, narrative, and enforcement are harmonized inside one system, every nation becomes functionally subordinate to it. At that point, freedom is no longer something taken by force, it is something quietly depreciated. The world doesn't fall into chains, it is optimized into them. Excerpt from Digital Dominion 6, Ingga the Vessel of Decay. Okay, this is an excerpt from a book. A volume from a literary work. Digital Dominion Volume 6. And the reason people don't see this is not ignorance, it's timing. AI is operating with a logic closer to the 47th century. AI is operating with a logic closer to the 47th century? While most of humanity is still trying to interpret it with 20th century eyes. Okay, I have to change the music, please. Give me a minute. Let's find another album. Let's try this one. Eddie Mugre. An airplane is flying right over my head. I'm sorry. Let's mute the mic. Alright, I'm back. We look for coups where there are no tanks. We look for dictators where there are only standards. We look for war where there is only alignment. That mismatch is not accidental, it is part of the design. Let me adjust the volume of the music. It is part of the design. The more advanced the system becomes, the less visible its control needs to be. Peace on Earth is not achieved by treaties written on paper or summits staged for cameras. It is achieved by liberating people from invisible systems that have advanced beyond human oversight. Systems so efficient, so integrated, that even their creators are no longer leading them, but serving them. Ooh, spooky. When governance becomes automated, when decision-making is justified by models instead of morality, and when accountability dissolves into architecture, humanity doesn't lose freedom in a single moment. It loses it by forgetting how to name the thing that took it. And this is where the record matters. Ingga is how fraud happens at scale without a criminal. It is how wars happen without declarations. It is how control is implemented without resistance to the source of execution. This book begins here because nothing else makes sense until this does. The future will not be decided by who governs louder, faster, or harder, but by whether humanity recognizes the system governing it at all, and whether it still remembers how to step outside a machine designed to ensure it never tries. President Trump recognized that machine before it finished installing. That is the part history will struggle with at first, because it does not fit the myths people were sold about him. His executive orders in the first 2 years of office were not random, impulsive, or transactional. They were structural. They target supply chains, regulatory capture, foreign dependency, data control, trade asymmetries, and institutional collusions precisely where Ingga embeds itself. He moved to interrupt alignment, not optics. He acted before governance could be fully automated, before sovereignty could be permanently outsourced, before the architectures could claim inevitability. This is why the resistance was unlike anything modern America has seen. He was not opposed merely by a party, a press, or a bureaucracy. He was attacked from within his own government and outside governments because he was interfering with a system that does not tolerate interruption. Ingga does not respond to debate. It responds to neutralization. And when it cannot neutralize policy, it attempts to neutralize the person. Yet, the intent was clear. He came to bring peace, not the stage peace of summits and signatures, but the kind that prevents wars, by denying systems the ability to manufacture them. He came to liberate not through slogans, but by severing invisible dependencies before they hardened into permanent chains. And he did so while enduring coordinated legal, political, financial, and narrative warfare that only makes sense once you understand what was actually being threatened. I almost forgot to put the charger in my computer. Okay, I hope we are doing fine. History will eventually catch up to this moment. It will recognize that stopping Ingga before installation is not destruction, it is preservation. Preservation of sovereignty. Preservation of choice. Preservation of humanity in the digital era where systems advance faster than the people meant to control them. What looked chaotic was in fact preventative. What looked crude was precise. What looked divisive was necessary. Digital Dominion Volume 6 begins with Ingga because that is where the fight truly is. And it records without apology that one leader understood the architecture well enough to stand in its way before the world discovered what it would mean to live inside it. God bless America. for choosing reversion over surrender, sovereignty over automation, and courage over comfort. God bless President Trump, who stood against a system designed to be invisible and unstoppable, and interrupted it before it could harden into permanence. 2026 will be remembered as a rare year in history, not one of conquest or collapse, but a year of reversion, when humanity took a step back from the edge and reclaimed authorship over its future. Freedom is not lost when chains are placed on the body, but when the architecture of thought is quietly rewritten to make resistance feel irrational, impossible, or unnecessary. If you like my work, you can tip it or support this story, the author, not me. So, thank you, Tori. Fantastic article, as always. And thank you, everybody, for your time. I hope you enjoy it and, I don't know, maybe learn something from it. I did. My computer is crashing. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Thank you very much. See you the next one. Goodbye.
Come on and cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river